Hello and welcome. For those of you who are avid listeners and viewers of Sky Thoroughbred Central, you know the voice and the face of Ray Thomas. Ray's also the chief racing writer for the Daily Telegraph. And I thought it was high time we found out a little bit more about Ray Thomas. So I sat down for an interview with him recently. Found out a few interesting facts. We could have lost Ray to the Defence Force. He spent 9 years in the Air Force. He also tells a funny story of a run-in with a certain Kerry Packer. I hope you enjoy. Well, Ray Thomas, thank you for joining me, and this must be a bit different for you, the interviewer being interviewed.
Roles are reversed. Thanks for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure.
Now, Ray, a lot of people would know your face from Sky Thoroughbred Central. They know your voice from Sky Radio, but not many people know an awful lot about you. Now, I've known you for, must be going on 30 years. And I haven't seen too many interviews with you, so I thought it was time that you let the racing public know exactly who Ray Thomas is.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Steve. It's probably not all that interesting a story, but it's a privilege to be on the other side of the camera, so to speak.
Ray, let's start at the beginning. You actually were born in Hong Kong.
I was, yeah. My father was in the Air Force, and he was posted over there at the time, and a long time ago now, Steve, way back in 1964, and he had a couple of tours of duty, so to speak, in Hong Kong, and we went back there a second time.
Yep.
I actually started my first year at school when the second time we were back in Hong Kong, so but haven't been back there too many times since, but some fond memories there.
So you come to Australia, and when did the racing bug grab you?
Oh, very early on, actually probably Perth.
Yep.
Where my father was posted in Perth at the time, and growing up in a sports mad family, and I was kicking a football and a cricket bat in my hand from the time I was about 2 years old. And in Perth, I remember looking at the form guides on a Friday and going through it with my dad. I think my first memory of a horse race is probably Gay Icarus's 1971 Caulfield Cup. And
Yep.
when my dad said on the morning of the race, this horse is a champion, it should win. And I remember Bill Collins' call, could be the best horse in the world, he said at the time.
Wow.
So probably way back then, I'd say 1971. And I remember also when we were very young, my father used to drive us to Gloucester Park Trots on a Friday night, I think it was back then. It could have been a Saturday, I can't remember now, but a long time ago. But only to see one race and see one horse.
Yep.
And it was a horse called Mount Eden, who used to,
I remember the name.
Miss the start by 50 or 100 yards back in the time, and still circle the field and win. And he won the 1971 Miracle Mile, and if you ever get a chance to watch that on YouTube, it's the most extraordinary win by a horse of any kind I've seen in my life.
Yep.
The pace of a thoroughbred, it was extraordinary. So I think probably way back then I was bitten by the bug, and the sports bug primarily, but certainly racing was right up there.
Now, apart from being an elite journalist, you're also a pretty handy cricketer. So was there ever a decision between journalism and cricket? Was there a crossroads there?
I played a lot of cricket and football in my youth, and indeed when I actually was in the Air Force for a while myself, and I played a lot of football at the time, rugby league when I was growing up, but then when I joined the Air Force, so I switched back to Australian rules, which I played when I was very, very young in Perth. So, and I played a lot of cricket, always in summer, and I guess I realised pretty early on, with about 19 or 20, I wasn't going to wear the baggy green for Australia, so cricket became, rather than my heart set on a career in cricket, it became more of a fun thing with my mates, as football did, but certainly played right through to I was in my mid-20s, and then journalism basically took over.
So tell me about your time in the Air Force. You were there for about 9 years, is that right?
Yeah, and a complete waste of taxpayers' money I was, Steve.
Is that right?
All I did was study and play sport. So the Air Force, Defence Forces is a great way of life if you're prepared to do what you're told, so to speak, and which is how obviously Defence Forces run. But in the Air Force, had a lot of opportunities to study. I did a lot of my university through the Air Force, but also whatever sport I wanted to play, if you could play at a certain level and make rep teams and stuff, Defence Force looked after you all the time. So I played a lot of cricket in summer, obviously, and Australian rules in winter, and a lot of touch football at the time. So as I said, I was a bit of a waste of taxpayers' money. I don't think I did too much for the taxpayer, but a lot of great memories, and a lot of my lifelong friends are still from those 9 years I spent in the Air Force.
So when exactly did you start penning racing stories?
It was funny because I was in the Air Force and at the time I wasn't earning a lot of money, and my brother was in journalism, and I said, mate, I'd love to earn some extra money, and he put me onto a bloke in Melbourne who's become a lifelong friend, John Anderson, who still works in the Herald Sun. And John said, look, we need someone to help on a Saturday. Are you prepared to do it? And this was winter, and I thought, I'll have to give up football, which I was playing onto rules at the time, and I thought, I'll give this a try for 3 months and see what it's like. I'll go back to cricket in the summer.
Yep.
But that was the winter of 1988. I'd been posted to Melbourne the previous summer. So I started going to the races for the then Sunday Herald. It was a tabloid, a broadsheet Sunday paper. It didn't last long. It merged with the Sunday Sun and became what is now known as the Herald Sun, so it became a tabloid in time. But it started in the late 1980s, and so I worked there. I did the first race, reported on the first race, reported on the last race. In the old days, you had to file the steward reports through by phone. So, and got to work with people like Adrian Dunn, who's been a lifelong friend ever since. He was a racing editor at the time, and Tim Hable, another great mate. And so the first year or so, that's all I did in journalism, but it sort of got the bug going, because I sort of learned a lot off Adrian and Tim, and got to a point in my professional life where I had to make a choice if I stayed in the Air Force or got out. And I got to the 9-year mark, and if I'd stayed in the Air Force, I would have made a career out of it, because it would have gone on to 20 years, etc.
Right.
But I had to make the choice. I remember I rang up my father, who was still in the Air Force at the time, and I was just about to turn 26, and I said, what should I do? And he said, what's your heart say? And I said, mate, to try journalism, I'll get paid nothing. You start right at the very bottom. And he said, go with your heart. So that was a great piece of advice.
Good one.
Never regretted it.
Good one. Dads are pretty good at that sometimes.
Yeah, he certainly was. He got a life lessons from my father, who's passed away now, that I still think back on, and often think, what would my father have said at this point? And it's amazing how you think back and you still get the right decisions from little things you learnt when you were a kid. So,
Sure. Now, a question that I'm often asked over the period of time that I've been photographing racehorses is that, what's your favourite picture? And out of all of the thousands and possibly millions that I've shot, it's hard to pin it down to one, but I'm going to pin you down to, is there a favourite story that you've covered during your career that stands out?
Favourite story? Yeah, gee, so many, because do I need to pin it down to one, or can it be broad?
No,
because I think the beauty of racing and why I fell in love with the sport, and as a journalist I've stayed with it, because I could have covered other sports. I could have covered cricket, I could have covered AFL and those sort of things, and I think it's the people that are in the sport which make the sport. And I often hear racing criticised because it's a gambling medium, and there's an anti-gambling sentiment in the modern era. But at the end of the day, adults make choices. It's your choice what you do in life. And provided you bet within your means, I have absolutely no issue at all with the sport. I think in actual fact the sport does a lot of good for the community, and I think that's often overlooked and understated. The wagering taxes pay for a lot of our roads, a lot of our schools, a lot of our hospitals, and I think racing gets a bad rap at times, and I think primarily the greater good in this sport far outweighs any of the negatives. And the characters, the individuals in racing, I honestly don't think there are a harder working profession anywhere in the world than people who work in racing. The hours they do are extraordinary. Well,
especially those morning workers, those stable hands.
The stable hands, the trainers.
Who wants to work, earn that sort of money for those sort of hours, ridiculous early hours that
they do it for the love of the animal.
Of course.
And they absolutely love the animal, and that's another thing which gets me upset at times, is that racing often gets criticised for animal welfare issues, and I think Australian racing has led the way with animal welfare issues worldwide for a number of years now, and still I think is ahead of the curve worldwide, particularly drugs, the post-racing career of horses, etc.
And let's face it, Ray, we're always going to get bad apples in every industry, aren't we?
Any walk of life. So to pin racing down for one or two bad apples and say the whole sport does certain things is just plainly wrong. And I think racing often sits back and doesn't promote itself well enough and promote the good aspects of it, and shows racing in the light it should be shown. And back to my original point, it's the characters involved in the sport, Steve, and they work hard, they work long hours for the love of the animal, and thoroughbreds are treated like someone's children. They're literally so well looked after. And I often think animal welfare groups which may have an anti-racing sentiment, I wonder if they've ever actually visited a thoroughbred stable and observed just how the thoroughbred is cared for, because it is extraordinary, and that I think would change a lot of people's perception of the sport. And of course the animal, I absolutely love the thoroughbred and the majesty of the thoroughbred as well, and I think jockeys are amongst the elite sports people of the world. The fittest, the strongest, probably the bravest, and trainers are extraordinary people, the hours they work. And so to say I've got a favourite story, I don't know, but I think what makes racing a favourite for me is the people that are in it, and of course the thoroughbred itself. I think there's so many great stories, and maybe we don't push the good aspects of racing enough at times.
I'm sure we don't, and we get, and like you say, wrongly criticised for an industry that does an awful lot of good for society.
Correct.
Okay, let me pin you down to what's your favourite horse. What horse have you seen in your career which is like stands out?
Winx is the best horse I've seen, and certainly she's a favourite of many people, I understand that. But to me, Kingston Town was always the horse I absolutely loved. And I'll never forget one day when I was a kid, I wasn't a kid, I was 18 I think it was, and we had a bye one weekend, and we came to the races, and it was early September, and some of my teammates came down, and Kingston Town was racing in the 1982 Hill Stakes, and I told all my mates how good this horse was, the best horse in the world, etc. I was just totally enamoured by him. And he was beaten this day by Cossack Prince, a 3-year-old, a very, very lightweight, and I was in the public on the fence, and I was absolutely shattered. But I remember just about 5 metres away, a lady was standing next to, I presume, a boyfriend or husband, and she was in tears. And the bloke turned and said, "What's wrong with you?" And she went, "The king got beaten." And I thought, okay, well, there's someone else in the world who absolutely loves this horse as much as I do. And of course, he was beaten primarily because of a great Peter Cook ride on Cossack Prince and a huge weight difference. But I think at his best, he was an absolutely extraordinary animal. His ability to accelerate, and in that autumn of 1980, when he was at a 3-year-old and at his absolute best pre his tendon injury, I don't think I've seen a horse who could live with Kingston Town at around about 1,600 metres or 2,000 metres, and maybe Winx would have beaten him, I don't know. But to me, Kingston Town was a horse that made me totally fall in love with horse racing.
It's always academic when you start talking about comparing horses in different eras. I mean, Kingston Town was a freak. He could win 1,200 metres first up, and at the end of the campaign, he'd be winning over 3,200 metres. And also he'd be able to make 2 and 3 runs in one race.
Phenomenal, yeah. But then Winx went 33 races without getting beaten at the top level, and that to me is quite incredible. And we won't see that again, Steve, that's for sure.
No,
so
not at all.
I think we actually had an exercise with some learned racing people on Sky last year. There was Greg Radley, Max Presnell, Alan Thomas came down from Brisbane, Ian Craig and John Tapp, and we discussed where Winx fits with the greatest in the world. And I think at the end of a pretty robust debate, there was fairly unanimous agreement that she was the best, but that is in no way looking back at Kingston Town and saying he could have beaten her on certain days, I'm sure, because he was just so electric. But her 33 wins in a row, gee, it's hard to ignore.
No, you can't. What about jockeys, Ray? Have you got a favourite one there?
Yeah, look, I always thought Mick Dittman was the best I've seen, along with Darren Beedman. I still think that, but I think in the modern era there's some phenomenal jockeys. I think James McDonald was destined to be one of the all-time greats, and it's still hard to believe he's not quite 30 yet, what he's achieved already. And I think our riders are the best in the world, and I say that without any equivocation. And I know there's people who might think Frankie Dettori, etc., but I think our jockeys, they ride so tightly. There's no margin for error, very little margin for error in our racing, and I think when we see overseas jockeys come and ride in the Melbourne Cup, especially the first time, they're pretty well, it's a bit of an eye-opener for them. I think our jockeys are the best in the world, and I've always thought Mick Dittman and Darren Beedman are the two best, but J Max, I think in 10, 20 years' time, we might be looking back and saying he's one of the all-time greats.
I know you always had a soft spot for Kay Langby.
Kay Langby and Miracle Mal Johnson too. Kay Langby was my regional boyhood hero. When I remember when he's riding for TJ Smith, I just loved everything at TJ train when I was a kid. And And I can think back on Kevin Langby, the great horses he rode for TJ, like the toy shows, won the 75 Golden Slipper. Imagil should have won the 73 Golden Slipper. Harts Hill, he had so many great horses. Then Miracle Mel came along, took over KL's spot at TJ's, and at first wasn't too sure what I thought about Miracle Mel, but he became a boyhood hero of mine. And I actually took about photographs. I actually took a photograph of Kingston Town after he won the 1982 Warwick Stakes, run back in those days at Warwick Farm. And he made a comeback that day, and my little camera, I got Miracle Mel about to come back into the enclosure, showing his whip to the crowd on the Great Black Horse, and I've still got that somewhere. And years later, I actually did a radio show with Miracle Mel. We've become fantastic mates, and it's funny how life takes you in full circle. But back then, I looked up to that jockey and thought he was just the greatest, and on the greatest horse. And
definitely. Well, it's been great to chat to you, Ray. But I can't let you go without one question about a certain Kerry Packer. Is the story true that he tried to get you sacked?
It is. It's long, so you want me to tell you the story?
Just give us the abbreviated version.
All right. It was the 1998 Melbourne Cup, and there was a massive plunge on Might and Power. And of course, bookmakers are like doctors; they don't give away their clients' names,
information.
Exactly. So, on the night of the Cup, we're all writing our stories, and a lot of rumours were going around the track as to who backed Might and Power, and there's talk of a $6 million betting plunge, etc. Most of us wrote that, but didn't have the identity of the punter. The next morning, I got a phone call from Cole Allen, who was my editor of the Daily Telegraph at the time I was in Melbourne. And Cole's, shall we say, pretty famous in journalism for his robust nature, I'll put it that way. And I think his words to me, actually, I'll never forget them. He says, I don't care if I don't see you again for the rest of the year. I don't care if you don't write another story for the rest of the year. I want to know who backed that horse yesterday. And he hung up. And I thought, well, I'm shot to pieces. I've got no chance. I've only been about 4 years in the Telegraph, so I was still pretty much learning the ropes, and I just didn't know where to start. But I did have a very, very good friend, a lifelong friend in the bookmaking ranks, and I made a call to him, and I went through exactly what I was told, and there was a pause on, or what I was told to do, and there was a pause on the line. He went, mate, you backed it with us. And I went, I beg your pardon? He said, mate, you backed it with us. And I said, you're kidding, aren't you? And he went, mate, you don't give away our name or our firm, and I'll tell you exactly what was said and how it was done, because they record the conversations. So on the Thursday morning, so it's Oaks Day, and the front page has gone out, Packer wins $6 million on Might and Power. Anyway, unbeknownst to me, I'm on the way to the races. I get a message there's no mobile phones back then, to ring Cole Allen urgently. I got to the track and I've rung Cole, and he said, answer me 2 questions. Yep. He said, are you 100% right with this story? I said, yeah. Will your contacts back you up if need be? And I said, yeah. I said, why? He said, well, Packer's been on the phone, he wants you sacked. He's denying it's him. And I went, oh, jeez. And he said, leave Packer to me as long as you're confident in your contacts. I said, I am, Cole. He said, leave Packer to me. Anyway, so all day I was pretty nervous. I was a young bloke, and I was thinking, holy hell, this is a disaster. And I was ghostwriting Shane Dye's columns at the time for the News Limited Group, and it was getting towards the end of the car. It was Oaks night, and Shane and I had worked on a day to catch up for dinner that Thursday night, and went back to the Chinese restaurant at Crown. I can't remember the name of the Chinese restaurant now, unless you can remember it for me. But and we were having dinner, and I was telling Shane Dye the story. I'm great friends with Shane to this day, and Shane thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And then, by an absolutely amazing coincidence, I had my back to the door of the restaurant, so Shane could see who was coming, and I couldn't. And after about 5 minutes after telling this story, he goes, Ray, you're not going to believe this. And I said, what? I said, Lloyd Williams is coming in with Kerry Packer. My jaw just dropped. And Shane stood up because he knew Lloyd and Kerry very well. Lloyd, Kerry called him over, and I thought, my life's about to end here. And over came Lloyd Williams. Ray, how are you? Good to see you. I said, hello, Mr. Williams. And I was introduced to Kerry Packer by Shane Dye. And he goes, what's your name? And I said, Ray Thomas. Mr. Packer, how are you? He shook my hand, he grunted, and he walked off. And never heard from it again because the story was right. So it was interesting, but we managed to avoid a scandal and avoid getting sacked. So that was how many years? That's 22 years ago now.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Great story, Ray. Great story.
Amazing.
Thanks for catching up with me, Ray.
Thanks for
a real pleasure, and I hope that the racing public out there enjoy reading your articles and seeing your interviews on Sky for many years to come.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Right.